to help participants, experts, leadership engage effectively and have the most effective meetings possible, we've put together some guidelines that you can use as a participant before, during, and after a meeting. And there's also some tips for committee leadership as well in terms of preparation and this kind of thing. So I will just point out quickly on ISO Connect. Here is more information about some of the measures that we have taken in recent months to try to support our committees in terms of keeping the momentum going on your work programs. There's been some decisions by the Technical Management Board about project management, and also just want to point out some resources here. In particular, this document right here, Participation Guidelines for Virtual Meetings. A lot of the slides that we have today will just cover some of those key points in here. So I just want to share that with you. We can give you the links to everything after the meeting, but it's on ISO Connect. So I'll just jump back to the presentation here. Okay, so I think the first thing we want to do quickly before we get into the specific details is just remind ourselves our role in ISO standard development, in particular participation in the committees and the working groups, because all this still requires ownership and responsibility over the development process. That hasn't really changed whether we're meeting in person or not. So even as we go temporarily into an all virtual committee work the next few months, your obligations to participate are still the same in terms of attending meetings and voting through your national bodies. So all that still needs to continue. And of course, special attention to project management is going to be quite important here as we go these next few weeks. So this first slide is mainly covering details that are found in the My ISO job brochure, things that we expect participants and experts to just be familiar with as they go about their work in committees and working groups. So in particular, there's a list here, just remembering the ISO Code of Conduct, being an active participant in decision making. If you're signed up for a committee or a working group, that you're actively involved, making use of the ISO IT tools, meeting deadlines for meetings and comment resolution and drafting and all these kinds of things, whatever you may be involved in, preparation for meetings, and then of course things like remembering issues related to copyright and trademarks, patent declarations, data protection, this kind of thing. And then also remembering our policies about how we communicate the ISO committee work to your colleagues and things like this. So more detail on all of those bullet points can be found in the My ISO job brochure. There is a link here in the presentation, which I imagine you will get a copy of afterward. And I will just point it out here. Here's just what it looks like in case you haven't seen it recently. I would say it's a good refresher for all of us, whether you've been in the ISO community for some time or you're quite new. It covers quite a bit about just the standard development process, your role as a participant, and again, there's also a lot of helpful links at the end of this brochure that I would recommend that you refer to if you haven't seen it recently. So there's also another tool, I guess, a resource for you that may help on some things. If you're not familiar, ISO has a website, a YouTube site on training. And here we have a number of different modules on standard development, procedures, project management, drafting standards, IT tools, other kinds of things that might be of use to you. And in particular, I just wanted to point out there's more detail, again, about participating in committees here. I put a couple of links on this particular YouTube. We have an English and a French version available. So I'm going to go into some detail here just briefly about things you can do in getting ready for a Zoom call, things to do during the call, and what we need to remember afterward. So a few weeks out, a few months out, I should say, I think it's the first thing of all things is when you see the meeting notice go out from your committee management or your conveners to remember to register through the ISO meetings platform. Hopefully you're well familiar with that right now, but I have a link here for you so you have it. You want to review your agenda in advance, and if there are any things you want to contribute to that particular meeting, we invite you to get in touch with your conveners or committee managers before the deadlines that are stated in advance of their meeting. And also, since all of these meetings are going to be done over a web conference, most likely we'll be using the Zoom platform, which is available for use to ISO committees, but other platforms as well. Please get in touch with your committee manager or convener if we might need to make some kind of alternate arrangement, because we have heard cases where the Zoom platform may not be supported by an expert's company, things like this. So we want to encourage as much participation as possible. So if you think you might have a problem in terms of attending a meeting because of the platform available, please get in touch with them. Also, just things to think about as you're getting ready for your meeting. You want to communicate with your mirror committee, just making sure everybody's clear who the head of delegation will be, who is going to speak on behalf of the delegates, and also letting the committee manager know who's going to be reporting on behalf of your country. And another thing we just wanted to point out here was just working out a communications plan among delegates in terms of if you have to have some informal chat or trying to discuss any particular positions you may have. We would not necessarily recommend using the Zoom chat function for that because all of those texts are recorded. So we would ask you to consider, texting on the side or using other applications such as WhatsApp and things like this. Let me just make sure I covered everything. Yeah, on this other slide. Okay. So again, in preparation for your meeting, please make sure you've read and reviewed all the relevant working group documents that are found on the ISO TC server. In the coming months, this is going to be migrated over to a new platform called ISO Documents. So you'll be on the lookout for that probably later half of this year. Again, we encourage you to work with your mirror committees to discuss any positions or other ideas and comments on balloting or other issues related to your working group or your committee, discussing with stakeholders and just being familiar with everything that you need in advance of your meeting. And then if needed, if you're not sure about some of our procedures or the tools, again, we have the My ISO job brochure, the YouTube site for training, but also you can get in touch with your national body, hopefully, who can provide some additional support or orientation as you might need. Okay, so now we're just approaching the last minutes before a given committee or working group meeting. What do we need to be thinking about at this point? First is trying to find a quiet location. You may have a challenge with this if you have kids around the house or something like this. Since we're all home teleworking and some are still homeschooling these days, trying your best to find a fairly quiet location so that there's minimal distraction. Another thing is, again, testing your web conference connection in advance, ideally 10 to 15 minutes before you start. Entering any particular call on mute and using a headset if you can, again, just to try to minimize disturbance and noise. And another suggestion that we have for you is if a given meeting may have quite a few number of attendees, maybe turning off your video camera function in order to maximize the bandwidth for the meeting. I've also just posted below an ISO quick guide to Zoom meetings. Hopefully by now you're fairly well familiar with the Zoom platform, but here's a quick link that just gives you some quick tips on where to find, sharing your screen and chatting with participants and this kind of thing. As we've mentioned before, just making sure you've already reviewed all the relevant documents, the agenda. Hopefully you've made any comments that you needed to make beforehand, having looked at working drafts and preparing comment tables as you need. Another thing is also when you get into the platform, making sure your full name is provided on the participant area. This will be a great help to the committee managers and the conveners so they have an accurate head count of who's there and also who they are representing, because providing a national body affiliation or your company, if you're in a working group, or your liaison association, and your specific role, any detail that you can provide can be helpful. So we have just a couple of examples here below. First one, John Smith from ANSI as the head of delegation, or from XYZ company. Okay, so now what do we need to cover during the meeting? In-call issues. Couple things here. Just if you happen to be arriving late to any particular call, we would just maybe suggest using a chat function to announce your arrival to the committee manager and just wait to be recognized, just again, for attendance purposes. If you're having some technology issues with whatever platform you're using, you might want to contact someone other than the committee manager or the convener, because they're probably well in the process of getting a meeting set up and just making sure that everything's working and also just running the meeting. So sometimes maybe a committee or a working group will have a meeting manager who's able to monitor these kinds of issues. So just maybe keep an eye out for that. And then also, if your sound quality is low, consider hanging up and using a callback function. You have a couple options, at least on the Zoom platform and some of the others, where you can either dial into the call or you can request that the platform call you back. So this is occasionally something that you might need to turn to and might fix any problems with you might have with sound quality. Just a few other tips that we have here. Again, all of these tips that we've got and compiled here for you, we've generally gotten most of this information from experience shared from other committees, and then also with other organizations that we work with in terms of how they're trying to run their meetings. Just some best practice tips. So here we would just suggest, again, raising your hand using that function before speaking. And when called upon, just being as brief, clear, and speaking as concisely as you can. Also keeping your line muted when you're not speaking. And we'd also request that you might not put your call on hold to take some other call, because occasionally we get situations where playback music or hold music might be on the line, and the rest of the participants will hear that. So we would suggest maybe if it's going to take a few minutes that you hang up and redial back into your meeting after you had to leave. If there are occasions where a vote might need to be recorded, there's a couple options there, but typically I would just recommend that you follow the instructions of the committee manager or the convener. Sometimes they might just suggest a yes or no vote, which you can mark on the side. And also through chat. And in this case, if you're going to vote through a chat as instructed by the committee manager, to put your name, country, and affiliation. And typically this will be the head of delegation that would do this. But just want to make you aware of this. Okay, now getting towards the post-meeting wrap-up. What we want you to do, as always, is just to review the resolutions and the decisions that were taken as soon as they're made available, just to make sure that they accurately capture what you heard, and also in case there's any misunderstanding from something you had discussed or what the group agreed to, just making sure that everybody's okay with that. Also, in particular, double check any action items assigned to you. We want to keep the momentum going in between these phone calls and try to reduce the amount of dead time between meetings. This is all part of the extra work we've done to try to support good project management. So we look for you to make sure you're following up on the action items in a timely manner. And also, again, sharing your experience on the remote call through a post-meeting survey. As we had in physical meetings, we invite feedback on how the meeting was run and this kind of thing. So we expect and hope that you would let us know how you thought the meetings had been run. And of course, if there's any major concerns, to get in touch with your committee manager or your convener, and also your technical program manager as you may need. And the other thing that you may need to do is prepare any written reports for your national body or your mirror committee. This will help you just remember the details as they're still fresh in your memory, highlighting any major achievements and decisions from the meeting. And then also just you might need to record what the next steps are and when things are expected to happen. So this will, help with the planning for future meetings, not only for the committee, but also with your mirror committee. Okay, so this is one of the last slides in this presentation. It's just some other remote participation resources. Again, we have the participation guideline for virtual meetings. That was the document we've essentially done the last few slides on, and I will just show you quickly how that document looks in case you haven't seen it. This is just running through, the before, during, and after, and the responsibilities and tips that we have for chairs and conveners, committee managers, and then meeting participants, which again is what we've covered. So that again can be found on the ISO Connect page over here. So you have it. And there are some other best practices for conducting virtual meetings successfully. The quick guide to Zoom meetings and ISO Connect information on Zoom conferencing, just in terms of what your computer capabilities need to be, and all kinds of other information related to web conferencing. And then lastly, we have a link to ISO Zoom account eligibility. Just want to say here, you don't necessarily need a Zoom account in order to attend a meeting, but if you're taking over a leadership position, say as a project leader on an active project or a convenership, you do have some eligibility to receive an ISO Zoom account, and then you can contact your technical program manager to talk about that and get you set up. So I will just summarize very quickly, in spite of the unusual circumstances that we're facing here, the participation still is, critically important in working group activity, committee activity. This ensures the global relevance for our standards. It gets stakeholders involved. You guys are the voice of the industry in your country, so it's very important to have that input to make our standards valuable for people to use. It also helps, participation helps you meet your voting and participation obligations that are set out in the procedures. And it's also a chance to, again, introduce your own proposals and contribute as an active expert in your field. So we count on you for that. We can't make standards without you. So on that note, I just want to thank you again for your attention.